And I think if you asked the owner, he would have preferred to not have to have taken any of it out.
In terms of the exemption for the septic systems, I think there should be some sort of limitation there in terms of what I'm trying to avoid is a situation where somebody needs to put a septic system and takes advantage of the exemption and fills beyond what's needed for the septic system. I understand the intent is, okay, you need to put a septic system
So you're talking
in.
about the fill,
Yeah,
as
the fill
opposed to the removal aspect.
Yeah, or
Over-
the removal. I mean, in most cases nowadays, because of Title V, you're filling, but just to avoid the situation where somebody says, "Oh, I'm putting a septic system in,"
Well, I
and
think
while I'm at it, I'm
The
gonna-
idea behind the first portion of the exemptions was to avoid situations like that. So the following earth removal or fill operations are exempted from the requirements to obtain a permit under this article, provided that earth removal and fill is limited to no more than 3 contiguous lots and doesn't exceed a total of 6 acres. Operation is not conducted, maintained, or left in a condition so as to alter the natural drainage flow beyond the property, which I think that filling beyond what the intended design is may do.
I think you could make the argument that the installation of any septic system is going to alter the drainage. And at that point, is it the septic system causing it or the excess fill that was brought in? So
Okay. I'll see what I can come up with.
I understand the intent is to not put another hurdle in place where somebody now needs to go to the Board of Health and come to planning to get an earth removal permit or a fill permit just to install a septic system. But at the same time, I feel like that's a little bit of a gray area. Same thing with the foundation situation. I mean, I look at that exemption and say, okay, if somebody has a very questionable lot that has public utilities, so they have sewer and water at the street, so they don't need a well and they don't need a septic system, are we going to allow them to bring in 10,000 yards of fill to change the topography and build a house on that lot simply because they're starting with a new foundation?
Oh, you mean to fill it?
That it might
Yeah.
create a loophole.
Yeah, in other words, you have a vacant lot that's a giant hole in the ground, and you've got sewers, so you don't need a perk test, and, we're gonna bring in
So we're gonna
10,000
put the
yards.
forms up, pour the foundation, and come and backfill it.
Yeah, yeah.
So then we can fix that by saying a total of 1,000 feet, but includes cut and fill or removal?
Well, but I think that you want to be careful because if you're putting in, if you're working on a lot where you're putting in a new commercial building, the hole could well exceed 1,000 cubic yards just to put the proper foundation in. And if you came in and had a flat lot and were digging a normal foundation under normal circumstances, you want to avoid causing someone to have to file for something like this just because they happen to successfully be building a commercial building that exceeds what you're removing on a quality lot that isn't
No.
it isn't questionable. And I think that there's probably a way to blend that in there about excessive fill, and I think that, or removal. And I think that that's probably something that can be worked into the first part of it. And that way it would cover all of those exemptions.
And in the future, my thought is this is gonna run basically parallel to many other things. Like, in other words, if somebody has a huge commercial project, they're coming for site plan review anyway.
Number of other things.
And so then we can, at that point, it's not a lot of extra work. They're already meeting
True.
drainage guidelines, they're already doing full-blown engineering. So,
Typing out some fill calculations isn't.
and their closure plan is what they're building. So there really isn't a lot more that we're adding other
Yeah.
than doing the math in terms of cut and fill and what's leaving, what's staying. So,
I'm just trying to think if there's something that would qualify that someone could do that wouldn't cause them to be here, and I don't know that I'm coming up with anything.
I think single-family homes are probably.
And I think that's really but let me roll that around. I don't want to,
Yeah.
but
All right, anything more on the cut fill, earth removal?
No, I don't know.
No?
For now, right?
I will be sure to read it and mark it up, and I will forward my comments to Adam.
I was gonna say, and if you do read it and mark it up, comments ahead of the meeting is super helpful, because I can maybe have an answer for how we could do something differently, or come up with some new language that we can work on, that we don't have to wait 2 weeks for, or a month for, or whatever. So that'll probably get tucked onto the 22nd. Whether we actually talk about it or not is a whole separate issue.
And then just for everybody's edification, I have gone through stuff like this before and just scratched on the paper and sent it through the scanner and forwarded it to Adam. And as long as it's mostly legible, he can probably make something useful.
I was gonna say, and if you're working on a computer and not a phone, PDF will allow you to make notes, and it flags them off to the side, and that's just as good.
That's probably better, because there's no legibility
Well,
problems, issues, concerns.
And not everybody has a scanner.
Yeah. So now we're on to director's items.
We talked about the open space ad hoc committee vacancy and the committee reports, so I don't really have anything else to say unless anyone has questions or is looking to add anything to that. I did place an off-street parking and loading draft at everybody's place. I'd love to just run through it and give you sort of the logic. I don't expect anyone to have substantial comments, but the one that looks like this is our current calculations. The one that is a grid is my run-through of a first draft. So what I tried to do is put as few categories as possible to avoid having just like a litany of them. If you wanted to just mirror the use table, we can do that and just line them all up and put calculations next to each of them. I don't know that one's better than the other. Do you need one, Greg?
Yeah, I do. I don't think I got one.
I thought I put one at everybody's place. And I'll send this out in the morning. But, single family, two family townhouses are all pretty standard. 2 spaces is pretty standard. Multifamily is a little more complicated because they tend to be apartment blocks or something that has a variety of parking or of bedroom counts. So what I tried to do is make it a little more logical. So if you have less than 2 bedrooms, you need 2 bedrooms or less, you need 1.5 parking spaces. More than 2 bedrooms, you need 2. And that accounts for efficiencies in 1-bedrooms and families that have 1 car but live in an apartment, couples that share a 2-bedroom apartment, that kind of stuff. Accessory dwelling unit says we have 1. Assisted living is kind of a specialized thing, so it gets its own. Church and education are similar because they tend to, across most communities, gauge them by their assemblage. So education, you look at the largest area that someone could assemble and you generally assign parking spaces based on that.
Aren't those uses exempt from zoning?
They're exempt from zoning as far as location. They are not exempt from reasonable regulation, similar to daycares and agriculture, quite frankly. So we can't tell people they can't do them in any specific zone, but we can certainly tell them how they can do them in every zone.
Okay.
Hospital, I don't know that we'll ever have a hospital, but we have it in our regulations, so again, sort of a distinctive use.
Animal hospital,
What?
an animal hospital.
Well, that's different. That's
That would
a
fall under
veterinary
kennel,
hospital.
veterinary?
Indoor entertainment is one that I spent a lot of time searching, and spaces per 1,000 square feet seem to kind of click the sweet spot amongst those. Hotel, motel, bed and breakfast, private club and restaurant, auction house, I felt were pretty similar. In reality, auction house could probably go up with church and education. I'm kind of open to either. Retail, liquor store, personal improvement service, repair shop, those all kind of fall into the same sort of use. Now, this repair shop would be like appliance repair, excuse me, TV repair. It doesn't include vehicles or large equipment. That's later down with the automobiles. Medical and professional, they tend to have similar requirements. Auto sales, equipment sales, agricultural sales and services, I think all kind of have similar model for what they're selling and what they need for spaces. So their buildings tend to be a little bit bigger. They tend to have more stuff in the buildings and less people. So I upped the square footage there. Now, rolling stock for display, or displayed for sale, I kind of fumbled with how to say that, but it's different between equipment and agriculture. So auto sales would be per car for sale. And then we could require them to have a storage lot, which a lot of them do, where they just block a bunch of cars into a lot, and when they need them, they go and find them and pull them out. But all the cars need to be in a parking spot on site. Equipment sales, agricultural sales, you're probably only going to have one or two of your really big machines, but you might have 10 tractors, and you might only really be showing one of them off, and same thing, you might be storing them somewhere else. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't buy a lot of agricultural equipment. And same thing with, equipment sales, whether it's landscaping, paving, that kind of stuff. They're going to have different stuff.
Question there?
Sure.
Where would Commonwealth Motorsports fall in?
They would be in the auto sales.
So the four-wheeler would be required a full spot? Or a motorcycle?
Well, it says one space per item of rolling stock. So if they came and painted motorcycle spaces for their motorcycles that they were displaying,
Okay.
I think the board could reasonably look at that and say that's acceptable. We could modify the regulations to include motorcycle spots or auto sales that have different regulations for the size of their spaces. I know some communities, I worked in a community that had an abundance of auto dealers, and they had display spaces as something within their zoning code, but they had double-digit auto dealers in town. We have one. Maybe, no, we have two. Sorry, I forgot about Daewoo.
Jet planes, North End.
Oh, no,
Two at
North End,
North
it's three, yeah.
They're two
I
different.
think the challenge with that too is, if you look at some of the big box retailers, their parking lots become,
Showcase.
pallets of mulch and stacks of fencing, and then they get into equipment rental, and now there's a fleet of equipment rental stuff out there, and then
Well,
you
and
just
that's why
get-
I say rolling stock, and
Yeah.
we don't allow outdoor display
Yeah,
without special permit.
That's through, we've had people, Walmart's come to us
Yes,
before.
and they went to the zoning board and got a special permit for it, and then it's site plan, and,
I understand what Tanner's saying, parking spots should be used for
for parking. Oh, I completely agree, and I think that's kind of where the board has stood. I know both Walmart and Hannaford came for outdoor display, and it was all under the eaves on the sidewalk. And it didn't obstruct movement to and from the
Walmart just
building.
went to the ZBA for, or is going to the
I think
ZBA
that they,
for
yes,
storage.
they have made they made an inquiry about using parking spaces, and I said, the ZBA does that, and you will need to prove that you have the required number of parking spaces. If they choose to give up parking spaces, and they have the required amount, I mean,
I'm just looking to streamline it.
yes, I
and,
agree.
You know, be aware of the fact that people,
Should we, and again, I think restaurants is where we run into problems at times.
Mm-hmm.
Should we separate restaurants that have bars? Because it says one space per 4 seats, but then
Oh,
in
you know,
our current one, it's one space per bar seat and one per table.
Yeah, and I left that off, and it should say plus, one per employee on the largest shift.
And that was the common contention after the original Asian, because they realized they hadn't provided for the takeout spot. The
Yeah, I guess I feel takeout is a really difficult thing to gauge.
Well, it's no more difficult than handicap. I mean, that's,
Well, handicap is prescribed
I know,
per
it's a
per
state
law.
federal law.
I mean, not all restaurants do a healthy takeout business.
right?
You know, and if we want, if we want to compare, Ixtapa versus Asian, or
I mean, that's why this has to be uniform, but that's why
Yeah.
we look at them all as individual applications, because
Sure.
every one is different.
but you can't require them to add takeout spaces if
But seats are seats, so we have to assume that they're gonna be utilizing the space they're
correct.
occupying,
Yes.
so we have to, that's how we make it uniform, whether they're full all the time or not, or really, that's
Well, yes,
their
correct.
problem, not ours. you know?
And I mean, there's a couple of ways you could do that. You can lower the seats. You
Right.
could have it 1 per 3 seats, and that increases your parking count, and have that
And
make
then
up
for-
for the takeout.
Things like churches, I'm sure Sundays are their
Well,
most crowded
that's
days,
exactly
but I
it.
think but there are some that have function halls, like
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
St. Boniface and stuff like that, where we need to account for that as well. Most churches have ample parking, in my opinion.
And most churches aren't going to use their function hall while they're having service.
Right, right.
And if they are, it's going to be people from the service going to the function hall. The auto repair and equipment sales is sort of and fuel service station, it's 2 spaces per bay or workstation or pump island. Now, with a fuel service station and a C-store, you're blending 2 different calculations. So you have to add the C-store as retail and the pump island as pump
Even
island.
like private club restaurant, we don't account for employee.
That was a mistake. It got left off. It should say one per employee on the largest shift.
Right, right.
Unless you want to double up.
Well,
and
my
do-
first and my initial question was, should we separate bar seating as opposed to table seating? Because
I haven't seen it done that way very often.
that's how ours is now.
Well, I understand that, and I mean, quite frankly, ours is
Oh, I know
is
it's
ancient. It's
terribly flawed,
archaic.
and that's why we're going over it.
but-
I just don't want to make the same mistake twice.
But I don't know that. I mean, a seat is a seat.
Right.
You like I said,
Yeah,
we
but more people go to the bar. You're not going to go sit at the bar with 4 people a lot, as you would going out to eat. A lot of people go 1 and 2 to the
Correct.
bar more than they would to a.
I mean, I roll 6 to a car when I go out to
Right,
eat, though.
right.
So I'm making up for those other people.
Yeah, it's just a thought.
And like I said, we can knock it down to 1 per 3 seats, and that sort of splits the difference. And that way, we're not getting into, is a high top a bar seat or an eating seat? Because you can have a high top for a 4-top high top, and usually you're going to find the high tops at the bar.
Like a table's a table, but like when you're belly up to the bar, that's a bar seat
Mm-hmm.
to me.
And do we want per employee on the largest shift or per 2 employees on the largest shift for a restaurant and club?
I can't imagine anybody ride sharing to go to work.
That's
I mean, I can imagine it,
Yeah.
but I don't think
I
it's
would
very
say
likely.
1 per employee.
And I don't think we need to repeat it and everything. I think we could probably just do a footnote at the end saying, additional requirements.
Well, but I think that there's some where it doesn't apply.
Well, you could put like an asterisk, and one asterisk
You could.
is two asterisks, just to cut down on the bulk.
Well, it's not gonna, I mean, it's still one page.
You have done considerable improvement on this. This used to be like 3 times as thick when you got here.
I mean, it's, like I said, it's still on one page, which it is now, so I like to just enumerate it next to. I think it makes it easier to follow, and people love to miss
Well, and
asterisks. and-
Exactly.
it
Again,
gets dropped in a
I'm thinking of
printing.
it from when the applicant's looking at this and going,
Yeah,
And how would that apply in a situation where you have a fueling station, a retail convenience store, and like a Dunkin' Donuts all packaged together?
Like a drive-
most of those Dunkin' Donuts don't have seating, so you're just counting one per employee on the largest shift.
so they could technically have 0 parking. except-
No, because you have to have an employee.
They'll have the square footage of the retail area, they'll have the number of pumps.
So if you use the one that we just approved at, over on Electric Ave,
Yeah.
he had 8 pumps,
Yes.
so he would need 16 spaces there. He would need 1 per 250 square feet of net floor area for his C-store.
Yeah.
So what was that,
4,000.
it was 4,000, so that's 8 more spaces. And then the Dunkin' Donuts has, we'll say, 6 employees on the largest shift.
16. spaces.
16 and
Well,
24.
It should be 16 for the retail store, right?
Oh, you're right, I'm sorry. Well, I'm a planner and not an
16.
architect. 16 and 8 is 24, and then 6 for the Dunkin' Donuts is 30.
Okay. And how many did they actually have
I want to say he had,
Couple more than that, I think.
I think he had 32.
or something?
I'm blanking on exactly what it was. It may have been 24. And the thing with a convenience store is, in general, people don't hang around a long time.
I'm just looking at them in terms of, I go there all the time.
Yeah, no way.
Yeah, believe it or not. And it's tough to get around some days.
Well, and I think that's the balancing act, I mean, I worked on a project in a community, and it was a big box retailer, and it was calced out at 870 spaces they needed. And they came in and they went to the zoning board and they said, we have the same exact store in this other town, and their calculation had us at 500 spaces. And outside of the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we've never used more than 200 spaces at a time.
Yeah.
And the zoning board said, okay, so we'll knock it back to, 450 or whatever. And that's the thing is, if you hit something like this at just the right time, it's going to be hard to get around because it's, it's coffee time, it's coffee break, and I understand that, and we could over require parking, but then we get into more hotspots, and I'm not saying that's what
Yeah.
you're suggesting. It's just that's sort of the balancing act of hitting that spot where it's a little tight in here, but at least people aren't parked everywhere.
Yeah.
And then the last one is other permitted uses to try and do a catch-all of things that aren't. And I just assigned it to the zoning board thinking that it provides a little bit of balance. If you want it to be the planning board, we can do that. I've seen it done both ways. Where the planning board approves site plans and layout and design, it can sometimes cause tension to negotiate over number of spaces, as we've seen with number of units. That can sometimes be a sticking point, but if the board feels that it's better served here, then that's what we can do. And again, it
I think it
doesn't
should be here.
need to be
It's all part of
designed.
the whole package of the site plan.
But it's a lot easier for the applicant, especially, and I can't think of any other situations other than drive-throughs that sit with the ZBA now. I'm just trying
Oh,
to
we do
streamline.
drive-throughs. Planning board is drive-through. isn't it?
Hours of operation? We didn't do the drive-through at Electric Ave.
You did. We issued a special permit for that. I'm almost positive. They,
Did
they,
the hours of operation and we did the drive-through?
yeah, I think that they,
They wanted the 24-hour pumps, right?
We did do a special permit there. I don't recall if it was the drive-through or,
I thought that it was the drive-through, and they gave the special permit for the use, and they said the planning board will set your hours. Or maybe they set the hours, they set the hours for the drive-through, and they said the planning board will issue you the special permit.
okay.
Because if I'm,
I'm just looking to streamline it for the applicant,
Mm-hmm.
so if they have the ability to come here and get everything done, then that in my mind makes the most sense.
I tend to shift use approvals to the zoning board, because that sort of fits within their function as I see it and as I understand MGL.
Can we ask the ZBA their thoughts on this
Well,
subject?
we can, and again, I mean, this isn't use. I mean,
No, I know,
you're
but,
creating it,
I
and
mean,
Do
And-
we need to ask to get
we
the
don't have
answer
to
to that
ask.
question?
No,
have
but
to-
we-
we don't have to listen to what they say.
But we
I mean,
also-
talking about increased communication, then
we also once
asking is one way to do that.
once we have a draft of this, we do send it to them, so we can get their input. And
Okay.
I mean, if we put planning board and they say, "Oh, that's great," then that's great. If they come back and are like, "No, we really want to do it. Well, how come you're not letting us do that?" Then that's a different story.
Well, again, like shifting town meetings, shifting the special permitting of solar to ZBA. I mean, that's something we should work together on. We got it on our agenda, and I'd like
But I don't know that that was a ZBA.
no, I know it wasn't.
Sponsored
I know
petition.
I know it was a resident, but still, I mean, it raised questions. Why not ask and see what they have to say?
I think everything else looks good. I just,
Yeah, drive-through service, a special permit by the planning board.
okay.
So, yeah, I mean, and please have a read through. Look at, places where you think how it might apply. This,
Well, like the assisted living, Tri-Town, is that the new?
no, that is not
Don't
assisted
they
living.
have?
No, that was a 40R.
Well, and it's not assisted living.
That-
They're providing services as part of senior housing. Assisted living would be like, you've got a
hospice?
room and the nurses come in and check on you and kind of bring you your food, but you can get up and walk around.
Okay.
Um,
Again, I'm just trying to make sure.
Yeah,
there's
no.
loopholes Where they
and
build a apartment building and then have an assisted living section and they call it all assisted living.
no.
They're eventually gonna end up there.
With that, again, I think you're looking at blending, which portion of it is this, which portion of it is that. And Tri-Town is completely separate from this anyway because they're
Right,
within
they've
the
already
40R
been- I'm
district.
just trying to make an example
Mm-hmm.
where it could be misused.
Bless you.
Could assisted living go with medical clinic or professional office, or is it even more involved than that?
I think that the parking requirement is potentially lower for a larger space. So if you apply the one space per 300 square feet to an assisted living facility, I think you would have a sea of parking.
Yes, you're right.
And most of the people, all of the people who live there are probably not driving. And so the people who are parking are the people visiting and the people working there. So if you cover the employees by one space per employee in the largest shift, and you have a half a space for each room, then the people visiting, the likelihood of somebody visiting every room all at the same time is like, I mean, that was what would drive the Heart of Gold and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I mean, the improbability drive would just shoot you across the galaxy. It's unthinkable.
And what about loading areas and,
The loading areas are covered, we don't have a specific requirement for loading areas. It just, in the parking calculations, it says that if you have loading areas, they should be here, there, or otherwise, and can certainly be noted during site plan review. I have seen some communities that have a table similar to this for loading areas. They tend to be more commercial-based communities, up between 20 and 35% land use commercial. They tend to have more consistent national and regional chains that would facilitate them needing that type of regulation to facilitate some normalcy amongst them. Again, I'm not opposed to putting anything in there. It's not anything that I thought that we needed right now.
No, I'm just trying to clear up any sort of,
And it does say in the bylaw that we adopted a few years ago that loading zones need to be separate from parking, and they need to have clear and distinct access through the paths of travel and that kind of stuff to avoid, a loading zone being the best 5 parking spaces or whatever.
yeah, I just know in the past we've had some questions about square footage and so on, so I just want to make sure that if we,
You're talking about for parking?
yeah, because we were square footage based, now we're going
Yeah,
with
and
spaces.
this will eliminate that, which
Okay.
will make it easier to identify how and where the parking is, because this just says you need this many spaces. We have design regulations on the width of aisles for two-way and one-way, where parking spaces fit, whether they're perpendicular or 45 degree, and so it gives someone, I feel it gives someone a little bit more ability to be creative, because here's what you have to meet, and go figure out how to put it on. And the other one, it always confused me. And every time somebody else came in, they were like, I don't understand this. And it's an older way of doing it that,
Yeah,
So
looks good.
we are going to come up with the dimensional requirements for 90 degree versus 45.
we have all that. We did that the last time.
We did.
Yeah, when we did 6-4.
Okay. Did we do compact parking and?
It's been so long, I'd have to look back
Okay.
and I mean, we can institute these and we can go back and.
None of it's permanent.
Yeah, exactly. We can go back and adjust whatever makes sense. Of the 2 bylaws or 3 bylaws that we're hoping to put on special in the fall, I think this is probably the easiest lift, because it's just nailing down a few, I think, again, maybe I'm oversimplifying it because I want it to be simple, but it's just nailing down agreement on numbers and if we need to shift a number here or there. Whereas I think the other 2 have a little bit more substance to them.
So I did notice that previously we had child care facilities and schools, that I don't see either one in here.
Well, we have education with church.
Okay.
We can add childcare facilities.
That would alleviate the issues caused by certain ones in certain locations that are, right?
Yep. I had looked at adding it, and I don't know why I didn't
Now,
put
what
it
about
on there.
pickup drop-off rather than parking?
What about it?
Well, like the
Well,
daycare
I don't
facilities,
think
it's
that-
going to be almost all pickup drop-off.
So under education, it covers all the schools, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, it would cover all.
So, look at the primary school, what is their largest assembly area, the cafeteria?
I would say probably their gym.
And how do we know what the capacity of that is?
Maybe it's the 50 classrooms with
Like,
30
how many seats can you fit in the gym? I mean,
for single assembly or just?
no, for education, look at, we all see the parking situation.
Well, you know what? I can
And everything, but, and again, if it's used, again, it's like more of an accessory use, the soccer fields,
well, I think what I'll do is change that to,
or if there's any kind of, even if there's a function, I mean, I've had to park on Mass Ave before just to go see my son in a play.
so I think what I'll do is change it to one space per,
How about per child? I know it's a tough balance because they don't have every parent there every day all the time, but, and then, like, it doesn't account for teachers and.
so I think what I'll do is,
all the cafeteria staff and all that, so.
so I think what I'll change it to is one space per 5 persons of rated capacity in the largest assembly area.
Okay.
And that's
Would that
a-
go by like fire code or?
That, yeah, I mean, the building inspector needs to go in and post an occupancy number for the largest assemblage. And it's done on an annual basis.
So,
And that's based on building code and square footage and how they are, you know, how, whether they're standing or seated, whether it's fixed seating or movable seating and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
anything else? All right, so we haven't even been emailed these yet, so that's something else.
Yeah, I'll send that in the morning.
Eyeballs on too.
I literally printed those out today.
That's great. We'll take progress.
And now solar. I haven't made any attempt to touch solar because I've always gotten a lot of varying opinions on our bylaw being fine just as it is, our bylaw just needing a few touch-ups to clarify language, or, you know, we could take the bylaw and, you know, I think that there's an understanding of, from my perspective, what people attempted to do with that, and that was to remove solar as a primary use from most residential areas and allow it as, to look to allow it as accessory use for people to power their homes, and then focus the larger scale farming of solar into commercial industrial type areas. And I don't know what the board really, how the board really wants to approach that, but I've gotten the impression that everybody would like to see some changes made to the solar bylaw.
I think it needs work. I'll let history speak for itself. I mean, we've had one that has been uncontended. I'd say the most recent was the Electric Ave, but I'd say every other one, there is public outcry. How many people have we seen come out in favor of them and how many against? So that's just my opinion, but I think there is enough public outcry that it needs work.
I do think we need to address the nameplate capacity versus the footprint.
I do as well, and that's, I was gonna bring that up under, board comment, but
Welcome
I
to-
think. Pardon?
Welcome to.
Sure, I just think that we need to address that as well, because the battery backup systems are far more lucrative for these power companies, and I think we should have the ability to renegotiate pilots,
I don't think we
bearing
even,
that in mind.
I don't think we even speak at all to batteries.
Right, so nameplate, again, I think it should go, if we're gonna be signing a pilot, and again, that's the Board of Selectmen, I understand that, but we should be able to give an opinion on that to them.
And also, I mean, we've had 3 or 4 applications in a good number of years, and it almost seems like every single one of them comes back and tells us that they're being told something different from the power company, from the owner of the lines.
Well, it's entirely possible they're each being told something different depending on where they are and
I mean, as far as, oh, we can't service this unless it's got 3 poles that are above ground, and then others are like, well, no, you can do subsurface right from that transformer. And they've been telling us that the same company has been telling them different things, and like you say, it may be
That's been a
site-specific.
Unitil hurdle. We discussed that at Green Communities. They don't have the training or the capacity to accommodate underground services for solar farms.
Okay,
And they would have to pay for that to accommodate that.
So it's an
So-
equipment thing.
but
Right.
we reduced the Pleasant Street one down to 1 pole, didn't we? Instead of the
No.
3 that they were
No, it
requiring?
had,
There's 4 at Pleasant Street.
yeah.
Why am I remembering this wrong?
And then there was like one double one across the street.
I think that originally in the design, you had reduced it down to 1.
That's
In the
right.
approval.
That's right.
And then
No,
they.
in the approval, it was everything underground.
Correct, well, it had to daylight
And
at
then
some
they
point.
came back and said, we don't
No,
have the capacity.
It
to put
came
it
out
in."
to a single pole because there wasn't a pole at the frontage. Because all the lines are above ground there, so it came out to a pole and then went to the lines. And then when they went Mom's out front. Don't forget your stuff. When they went to Unitil to do the final thing, Unitil said, no, you need 3 poles because you need to put this on this pole and this on this pole and this on this pole. And it was a whole kerfuffle. So, and I agree the nameplate footprint thing is crucial because with the change in panels, you're gonna hit that nameplate at a smaller footprint. And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but the impact of 25 kW for a large house is going to be, right now, the bylaw kicks it into a large scale. And and let's even say 20, because I've had 3 or 4 people come in and say, I need 20 to run my house, because I've got this or that, and I don't want to do a large scale because I don't have 20 acres, and there was a gentleman
Again,
who
I
was,
think that rolls into accessory use. I think people should be able, if they have the land for it, to produce their own energy and get out from under the thumb of Unitil. When they start selling it off and making it a commercial entity, that's where I draw the line as an accessory use.
and I
Or
think,
if, like Pleasant Street, there is no, it's, the primary use is producing power and making money.
correct, and that's why I bring up looking for input, because, there's always going to be a portion of power that's sold back. Because there's always going to be a time where you're producing and not using. So, and I get what you're saying about, and that still qualifies in the accessory use because the majority of it is to run the home. And I think that's kind of where footprint can come in over capacity. And one way to do it would be to do percentage of lot size as allowable footprint. One would be to just put a footprint maximum. One would be to put a ratio between other buildings on lot and system. But that's something that, I don't want to invest a lot into going in a direction to address one or more of those and come back and have the board collectively say, well, we've decided that's not what we want. So I want to get some sense on what the changes you all want to make and propose and what direction you want to take it in, so I can kind of craft something that addresses that as opposed to just taking stabs in the dark at what I think makes sense.
Well, you would need to solicit some from Paul, I don't.
Well, and this is, this isn't going to be the last time I ask for input and run off on my own, but the sooner we start the conversation, the sooner I can start kind of, I have a majority of the board here, and I can certainly get more input from Paula, but I'd like to get this underway so that we can, if not fall, have it for spring at the latest.
So are we in agreement on name the capacity versus the footprint? I guess, is that the kind of input you're looking
Yeah.
for? Or are you have you already gotten what you wanted?
No, please have as much discussion as you want.
I think we need to have a plan when we approach any of these. We say we're gonna get it done by fall, but a lot of times that doesn't happen.
We could
I
get it done
think-
tonight.
Well, no, I understand that, but I think like even with the earth removal, we gotta have a plan on, like, we always have meetings off. We need to set goals for ourselves to get this done. I mean, so I'm hoping that we will get through at least the majority of that at the next meeting. But again, I think we should all reach out to Adam, maybe individually, and tell him what we think needs to be changed and why.
Okay. That would,
And have him try and come to some sort of consensus.
not to speak for Adam, but that would just be giving him more lifting between meetings, to summarize, or is that not an issue?
No, I mean, this is something that's been identified as a problem for going on 5 years now, and I'd like to get to it. And so
But
however.
that's what I mean, like, before our next meeting, we should read through the bylaw.
Yeah, however we-
Decide for ourselves and even express it at the meeting.
Yeah,
individually,
however we have to get
what we
to
think
it,
needs to be
let's
changed
get
and
to
why.
it.
All right. Well, also, we have a corporate headquarters in town for Unitil, and we have a peer review engineer. I'm not sure how electrically inclined they are, but I would like to ask a direct question of the corporate headquarters, what they are able to facilitate at these large-scale solars, and if not, and the small scale too.
You're talking about requirements for interconnection?
Yep. Because unless there's only two types, right? There's interconnected and there's totally separate.
Yeah, I don't know that there's many off-grid solar facilities around
No,
these
probably
parts.
not. And we don't regulate rooftop either.
We can't regulate
can't.
rooftop.
By right, yeah.
Yeah, but that's only
Even
up to 12
even
point-
in
that's
you know, regardless of our bylaw, Mass General Law says rooftop is by right.
And they also regulate that at 12.5 kW per roof, is what I've been told by installers.
They might.
Okay.
And I mean, again, that's all borne out by
No?
maybe
almost
for
positive.
residential.
I think if you buy shares into the program, you can buy that capacity and you can
I see
build
what you-
whatever you want.
I'll
We have to
be
talk after.
abundantly clear on my stance on the solar bylaw. I want to be able to deny one and go to court and win.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Well, I think
Have
part
it
of,
tight, no, I mean, and that's what it is.
I think part of the challenge when you start getting into the structures in terms of the poles and roof mounted and those type of things is a lot of that is outside of our direct jurisdiction. You know, in terms of where a utility pole goes, I mean, we have some control over it, but, and I think just from being around these facilities, you know, my business does a lot of mowing and, you know, general maintenance around solar facilities. And my experience from that has been that a lot of that is determined by the utility and where you are in the grid and what the substation will handle and how much free capacity there is on that particular part of the grid. So I understand the intent, and it is a concern. I mean, certainly in residential areas, to have them popping a pole in the ground every 40 or 50 feet, it's unsightly. It'd be nice to go underground, but I don't know how much of that we can really weigh in on, so to speak.
We can
So-
say we can require them to have them underground, it's not, and then they can go to Unitil. Let them argue with Unitil.
And my only response to that would be that I think if you found yourself in land court fighting with an electrical engineer that says this is electrically impossible and we need to go above ground, you're gonna lose. So if you want to go to land court and win, you gotta be a little bit mindful of some of this stuff.
And we should keep in mind, our town council's input before about the public utility has rights that,
I get that.
right?
So, in terms of the nameplate and the footprint, I haven't been party to that issue, but I'm gathering that it
So, in,
Well, essentially, it says that if you're 10 kW or below, you're a small scale. If you're larger than 10 kW, you're large scale. And you know, if they cap it at, you know, and in theory we could tier it and say we'll allow a medium scale that's, you know, 50 kW to 1.5 meg, and that we would allow as something. And rather than doing that and arguing about, well, how many kW you're putting, you say we're going to allow you to have no primary use solar is greater than 50% of any lot. No accessory use solar is greater than 15%. And you say you can, you know, you have a 2-acre lot, you can have, you know,
X amount
X amount of feet,
footprint.
X amount of square feet that is solar. And, you know, if you want to get spendy and buy the best panels that are going to give you twice the output as the cheap panels, then more power to you. But
well, I would warn against going by the ratios or the percentages, specifically because we have very few non-irregular lots in town. And by doing percentages and saying, well, they can get it in that many square feet, well, that's kind of a misnomer because very few people have square or rectangular lots. You've usually got these funky shaped ones, and given our setbacks from property lines and buffer zones, then once you
Yeah, and
apply
then
the
you're
buffer
playing
zones.
well,
with the
but all you're
solar
doing is giving
orientation, too.
them, and it doesn't need to be square to get a square footage. And I mean, I don't think we've seen a solar field put in that's square. They follow whatever buffer line they can, and they jog the panels in and out accordingly. And if you, the percentage I think isn't, I don't want to say easy, but it's a calculation that is flexible with each individual lot, as opposed to saying you can have no greater than 1,500 square feet of solar footprint as an accessory use. Because if you live on a 5-acre lot and have a 6,000 square foot house, maybe 1,500 square feet of solar panels only powers your garage. I don't know.
So is the issue with accessory uses, is the issue that we have gotten feedback that they're taking up too much space, or I haven't seen any accessory uses?
I don't think there's, the problem is, not the problem. I think the issue with ground-mounted accessory use is most of them are going to be over 10 kW. So they qualify as a large ground-mounted system. The majority of people putting them in aren't on 20 acres. So it creates this maelstrom of needing relief from the zoning board and then coming to get a special permit from the planning board to power your residence. And the way the large scale currently reads, it's geared towards a major system that's a primary use. And the
So they'd
people
be
the people who have
subject to-
voiced concerns about the location of solar in residential areas find that solar as a primary use in a residential area is not compatible with enjoyment of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as a residence. So going to a percentage use or an accessory use only and a limited footprint eliminates the ability for a large scale primary use. And you could also prohibit, you know, solar as a primary use in a residential zone. And I think that's the general conflict, I think. And, you know, I think you get into the 250 foot or the 200 foot setback, and for someone who is powering a residence, that is prohibitive.
Do you think we need to look at the overlays? Because they haven't been utilized or even any interest? I mean, I asked one of the companies why they didn't show any interest in the overlays, and they said because we weren't asked. And I know that,
Well, I mean, the overlays are all municipal and utility owned.
right.
And I don't know that, you know, outside of the newest member of the Board of Selectmen, that anybody's out really stumping to have a municipally supported system. The town doesn't have any, or doesn't have much capacity to take a power purchase agreement. So it would be a straight lease on municipal property. And I don't know that I don't know that that's the direction people have desired to go. I guess we could look at the overlays, but the question then comes, where do you put the overlays? Do you put them just over the industrial zone, and let those companies decide they want to, stop collecting rocks and start collecting sun? I assume, and I don't know because I wasn't here when it was created, but that the overlays were done intentionally because it would then facilitate the town operating some manner of solar facility.
Your guess is as good as ours.
And, really, if someone came to us and said, hey, we want to use the overlay, then we're like, great, but now we've got to do the procurement process. Whereas private owners can pick up the phone and say, hey, you interested in this field? I've got this many acres, you can put solar there. Or they can do an aerial search and say, oh, look at that giant area. I wonder who owns that. Let me call them and see if they're interested in doing solar.
I mean, they have that now. You can look online and see what percentage of sun you get, and
Yeah.
just through satellite tracking.
So, my recollection of the 10 kW is the cutoff between the small scale and the large scale, and the 20 acres is also part of that cutoff. So you can't have more than 10 kW on a parcel of less than 20 acres. Regardless of where it's zoned.
Yeah. And I think if you're tied into the grid, you can't have over 10 kW according to Unitil unless you've bought into the SMART program.
Oh, that may be. The interconnect.
Because-
I see what so in order, if you needed 16 kW to run your house, you'd have to buy in for that last 6 kW to qualify, whereas these guys doing these mega systems are doing line improvements and buying into that program because they're making their other money off of that.
So I guess if we've been approached by residents that are looking to do 16 or 20 kW, I don't know that they could actually.
Most of the ones that I've talked to already have a solar company, and they've got. So I anticipate that those folks are handling all that interconnection stuff because I don't have anything to do with that. I mean, I know enough to be dangerous about it, but the ins and outs and details would be between their solar company and Unitil.
I just know from my experience putting solar on our garage, which was, south-facing roof, perfect
Yeah.
spot to put it. Unitil capped us at 10 kW, single phase.
Now, did
We
you put
could've
your
brought
own
three-phase.
in?
We own it.
Yeah. So you purchased the panels and had someone install them.
Essentially, they did the installation, did the interconnect application, worked with Unitil, did the whole thing, soup to nut. But we actually had to disconnect a panel because according to Unitil, we were
Just a hair over.
0.01 megawatt.
Taking too much money back.
Yeah.
And I don't know if some
Still
of
get an electric bill.
and I don't know if some of these larger companies
Yeah.
that give you a free system and you get the free power are buying into the program on their own and collectively massing all the roofs that they have and are then able to bump up over that 10 kW. I mean, that would make sense to me.
I just bring it up as
Yeah, I mean, it's good information to have.
to flavor the thought process, because if we're looking to try to put residents in a spot where they can do this accessory use, I don't know that that's actually going to be the intended result for the people that want to own the infrastructure and get rid of.
And I guess in theory, they could connect 10 kW to the grid and leave the other 6 unconnected and still power their own.
On battery.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
again, not an electrical engineer, so I'm
We'll see how.
really shooting from the hip here on that.
What else? No? We've exhausted that for the moment?
For the moment.
Okay.
So I would encourage you all to read through that section of the bylaw, and please, if you want to type up a manifesto or stop in and talk about it or scribble notes on a printed out copy of the bylaw and scan them to me, that's fine. Just, you know, if we can start moving in some direction, then we can try and get this. I think the reality is this is more likely to be a spring thing. I think this is going to be a significant effort, but I'm willing to take a shot for the fall.
Now, we should have public hearings for all of these, right? Before that goes onto the warrant?
You won't need a public hearing for the earth removal.
Okay.
I think the selectmen would like to have a joint meeting to speak about it once you have put together a draft that the board is comfortable and supportive of, and then go and speak with them about what the draft looks like and what transition might look like and that kind of stuff.
So my suggestion then would be that we get together all of our own collective ideas and get them to Adam, and then get a draft, and then post for a public hearing, and then get the input from the citizens, and then we can fine tune the final bylaw. Does that sound for town meeting?
No.
No? Okay.
Well, because you can have a public meeting. I wouldn't suggest having the public hearing until you have a final draft, because you're going to vote on the public hearing you're going to vote on the draft at the public hearing, and that will be your recommendation to town meeting. So you could advertise,
Public meeting.
we're having a public discussion about this draft bylaw, that, you know, we're at the 75% completion stage. We want to hear public comment. We want to talk about it. I know that PJ Keating was interested in seeing the earth removal bylaw when the board got a more finished product, to provide some comment and input, as they are somebody in town who does a lot of this work. We could certainly send it to the Powell brothers, as they also are the only other person in town who does a significant amount of this work. They know, they've probably forgotten collectively more about earth removal than I have certainly ever known. So it might be worth it to have some, professional review of the bylaw. They could say all sorts of stuff, and you could say, that's great, but that really sounds self-serving and we're not going to do it. Or you could say, oh, well, that's something we never thought of, and maybe there's a way that we can work that in there.
So then, I want to have it very clear on the agenda that we're having a public discussion and we're taking public input on a draft bylaw.
And I think that when you can always take input. I think right now it's premature to do that.
Yep.
I think the board still has some work to do on frankly, obviously on.
I don't think I'm happy to take public input.
Oh, no, I'm not saying public input. I'm saying advertise a public listening session.
Yeah, again, it's at the chair's discretion who gets to speak on anything that's on the agenda.
Yes. I think it's
Anybody has something to say, please come in and tell
it's
us.
premature to advertise, come and talk to us about this bylaw, because you're all still formulating what your thoughts on it are and how the language is going to look.
All right. So if there's nothing else,
That's what I've got.
notices, communications
Have been scanned. Yep.
meeting schedule.
So July 22nd, we have Unitil. Which you've all seen that by email, at least.
Yeah. So did you get our discussion to them before they sent that email?
Get our discussion.
Because I remember we had a discussion, and I think we pretty much concurred that it would be a bad idea for them to start in the center of town.
I did. They said they had already begun the work at that point. And I think that follows up with,
It's your own risk.
yeah, and I think that's exactly it, and you probably all noticed that the selectmen were CC'd on, or included on that email, because ultimately they have to decide as landowners whether or not the town is willing to allow trees to be removed
Yes.
that are on town property.
Have we gotten any input from the DPW director, the tree warden?
Not as of yet.
So Unitil, this is gonna be-
I have a question about the public hearing.
Yes,
if
please.
it's appropriate. I did see, obviously it's advertised as a public hearing, but I was curious if we could make it clear to people who may be away that had comments, if maybe that we would be accepting,
Oh, written comments. Yeah.
email, like specifically ask for it.
Yeah, we can figure something out.
Maybe on the Facebook page.
You think people are away in July?
It's
I
possible.
told my son all the trees with the white flags were scheduled to be cut down.
Did he have one solitary tear?
Telephone poles. That's his response.
A quick study.
So,
So, Unitil on 22nd, you're still,
And we're also going to,
removal.
yep, Unitil, earth removal, and master plan.
and Paula said she'll be back for that one?
Yes. Wait.
I believe she did. That
Was master plan on the 22nd or was economic development?
That's what I was just looking for my agenda from last meeting.
I thought we had said the master plan was for.
That's what I thought too. Yes, August 12th is economic development, so master plan is gonna be for, the next meeting.
So master plan discussion on the 22nd. Has everybody picked up their?
It's in your packets tonight.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for that, Mark.
We deliver.
So that brings us to the ongoing items. Oh, wait a minute. Do we have anything for the 26th yet?
For August 26th? No.
That would be, I've gotten reached out to a few times about having a conversation about zoning, zoning, what everybody understands about zoning, what it means to them, I think it was mostly in conjunction with the
Holman
event-
Street.
event permitting.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's something that we'd want to put on the agenda. Maybe we could have a public, something, actually, it might be better for us to gain insight as to our own individual understandings of it, and then get some guidance and fine tuning from Adam on exactly what we are supposed to be doing and looking at and whatnot, because the designation for planning boards in Mass General Law has like 50 sections to it. There are so many different things that, and I'm sure that's all changed quite a bit since it was first in MGL, because that was probably back in the, what, the 60s, 50s?
Probably somewhere in there.
I know we had a planning board in the 60s, and they commissioned a bunch of aerial photographs, which created that picture that's in the Ritter building. And they're written up in the Lunenburg Red Book of 79. And that's as far back as I know anything about planning board, aside from the NGLs. So, how does that fit in your schedule?
I mean, tell me what you want and we can make it work.
Just, good.
Oh, no, I mean, honestly, I'd like to hear from each of the individual members of the planning board what their view on zoning is. I think we need clarity as to what we consider outlying, and is it just residential? I think just, I think that comes kind of in conjunction with economic development in the master plan. Because when we talk about economic development and we talk about sewer expansion and things of that nature, that's going to affect zoning.
Well,
But
there isn't a lot of what you consider outlying. Outlying is codified in 250 4.1 as what allowable uses are out there. So, I mean, you can have a perception of what it is, but the uses are codified and approved by
Use table.
town meeting.
Yeah.
And I know I've said before, it's functionally residential because its uses are almost a mirror image of the Residence A and Residence B. And for, I don't know how long before I started working here, they were all lumped together in one definition and use section. It was Residence A, Residence B, and outlying. So I mean, it may have begun as or originally just been like wildland, but at some point it got folded in with all the residential uses. So if the board wants to approach it differently, we can go back to the use table and reclassify the uses that are allowed in there. And is that kind of what you're talking about, is what people perceive
I think so.
the zoning
I
bylaw
mean,
to say,
like-
or what people's understanding of what Euclidean zoning is and its purpose and function and how it's carried out?
I think the Euclidean part, we could probably mix in a little bit, but I think we need more of just a ABC nuts and bolts. Zoning is this, this is how it interacts, and to follow on with what Mr. Bittner said, I do agree that we need a discussion about the outlying zoning. But that isn't really what I was thinking of, but it does bring up a good point. I totally disagree that it is a residential zone. I mean, there are no doubt residences there, but there are residences in the commercial zone. So to call something a residential zone or residential district, it's not labeled as such in the zoning bylaw. And
I guess my question is, what problem are we seeking to solve? In other words, what non-residential use is not occurring in outlying that you feel should be occurring?
outdoor entertainment. I think it's pretty obvious. I think I've been pretty clear. I grew up here. There were 2 drive-in theaters. There was an amusement park. There was a roller skating rink. There was a bowling alley. We've got none of that left. Nothing. Whatever.
I don't think any of that was in the outlying district to begin with, though.
Probably wasn't. But where has it got room to come back?
So my question is it a question of the outlying district, or is it a question of outdoor entertainment? Because if that's the use that we feel we're trying to create an opportunity for, that doesn't apply to the outlying district or Residence A or Residence B. That's a use, and then we're back to the...
Okay, so that bites right at my first original bringing this up, is the difference between using something for a permitted event versus building something as a permanent use. A permanent use needs to fall under zoning, whereas a permitted use, a licensed use, or an event, a one or a few time thing, does not need to fall under the zoning. It needs to be regulated through the proper people who regulate such.
I'm now lost as to what you're looking for on the 26th, because I'm hearing a lot of different things. I'm hearing about outdoor entertainment. It sounded like people have reached out to you to understand what zoning's role is in general, which, I mean, I can give you a historical, evolution of zoning and sort of a non-lawyer legal primer of what zoning is in our community today. But if you want to talk about, I mean, you're talking about parsing use versus activity and, sort of retrying something that's been talked about in a lot of different forums recently. And if the board wants to do that, you can, and I can give you the information that I have and my understanding of how that works, but I don't know that I am comfortable putting together a presentation on, you know, how one interprets those two things. I mean, that may be more of a town council level of discussion, because you get into a lot of legal nuance.
Okay. Well, I mean,
And I believe he kind of gave you his quick take on it when he was
did.
here.
He did, and I totally agreed with what he said. And I don't think that anybody else seems to have repeated what he said properly in discussions of what he said. He said that they're parallel, they're not overlapping, that if you get a permit from one board, then it's not a use, it's an activity. Zoning defines allowable uses, and uses being permanent, 24 hours, all year round uses of the property. I just want to provide a point for clarity so that we can stop chasing our tails on discussions like this. And apparently, it's making us chase our tails more.
But I don't think that there's a firm and clear end to it, because when an activity is perceived as a use and zoning enforcement is requested, the zoning enforcement officer is required to investigate at a minimum. And depending on what the zoning enforcement officer finds, can result in no action because there's a misperception of an activity as a use, can result in conversations of, you know what, right now it's an activity, but you need to cease or it's going to become a use, or finding that it has become a use and it is or isn't legal under the zoning code.
Okay. This is really starting to seem like we're specifying, but I'm talking mostly generally about the outlying district, but,
And I mean, if you want to put a discussion of the outlying district and the allowed uses in it on the 26th, we can do that. There was a citizen petition to add a use to the use table. The board felt that it was rushed and they weren't comfortable with what was included. If you want to pick up that discussion of that use or type of use in the outlying and review it for whether the board, as it's currently composed, feels that that would be a reasonable pursuit for annual town meeting in the spring, that's a discussion we certainly could have. If there's nothing on the agenda, I would expect the 26th would be a great time to really sit down and hammer away at the solar and the earth removal and the parking. But, you know, I leave that to you all.
okay, well, I mean, we've got 2 meetings between now and the 26th, so I guess it's not imperative that we put it in stone right now. but-
Economic Development Committee under ongoing items will be on the 12th. Stone Farm, that may be on the 26th, the construction bond hearing.
Is that, so so at the last I mean, we've reached out to them and they're just basically saying,
Well, they've been reached out to and they haven't done anything. And
Yep.
so what this would be is having the formal hearing, the board voting would give them again a time clock with
Okay.
which to do the work, and then the board would move forward with taking. And sometimes, just getting the notification that the hearing is being scheduled will trigger them doing the work, and then there's no need to hold the hearing.
and when are we planning that?
When
I
are we
mean,
planning-
some-
What?
To put that, to move forward with coming to a vote?
I was looking, I mean, the 26th would be a good,
Okay.
would be a
Yeah,
good date.
I mean, I
since we
just say
don't
the
have it.
sooner the better for that.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
I mean,
yeah. And that
we're
would,
not gonna do anything, we might as well put their
and that
feet to
would
the
give
fire
them,
and-
that would give them time through through the end of the construction season. I mean, the amount of work they have is incredibly minimal. I mean, it's some concrete and some paving, and a couple of rings and covers. Master plan, we're holding off on that for right now, until, after we've had more discussion.
All right, so copies of all this information is available in the planning office?
Yes.
So is there any public comment? No. Is there any board comment? Is there any concerns that aren't comments? And then I guess I would accept the motion.
I make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second. Any discussion about adjourning?
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Might have been boring, but it wasn't looking long.
Planning board from college, so
There you go. Good. You're Matt? What was your last name? Matt Stewart from Marjorie? I don't know. Good.